and living souls. A poetry that whispers more than it declares. A silence that teaches more than it conceals. A companionship where the secret passes unseen, yet unmistakably. For in the end, Fana and Baka are not doctrines to be explained, but realities to be lived. The master cannot give them, they can only awaken them. The seeker cannot demand them, they can only prepare. And when the time is right, the jewel is unveiled, dazzling, overwhelming, yet gentle enough for the heart that has been readied. This is the secret of their protection, not secrecy for pride, but secrecy for love. To guard the flame until it is strong enough to shine and to hand it on. Quietly, carefully, like a treasure that belongs not to one, but to the real, who gives and takes as he wills. Why are seekers led into Fana only to awaken again in Baka? Why this death and this abiding life? The masters are clear. The purpose is not escape from the world, not private ecstasy, not intoxication for its own sake. The purpose is transformation, to become a servant of the real, transparent enough for the divine light to shine through. In Fana, the ego falls away. In Baka, what remains is the human as they were always meant to be, a polished mirror of the divine names. The purpose is not to vanish into nothingness, but to become a clear vessel, reflecting mercy, wisdom, and love into the world. Rumi says, I died as mineral and became plant. I died as plant and rose to animal. I died as animal and became man. Why should I fear? When was I less by dying? This is the rhythm of Fana and Baka. Each death is a birth, each loss a revelation. And the purpose is always the same, to rise into greater life, until the life we live is no longer ours, but God's life through us. This is why the masters returned from their ecstasies. They did not stay in the fire of Fana, nor dissolve forever into silence. They returned to teach, to serve, to embody the real in the ordinary rhythms of living. Al-Ghazali came back from his crisis not to boast of Fana, but to guide souls with new humility and light. Rumi danced, sang, and wept, but he also healed, reconciled, and lifted hearts with his presence. The purpose of Fana and Baka is not self-destruction, but self-becoming. The true self, freed of illusion, radiant with God's presence. The seeker discovers that life is not theirs to control, but theirs to offer, to love without ownership, to serve without pride, to act without claim. This is why the Sufis insist, die before you die, not as an ending, but as a preparation. So that when death truly comes, nothing is lost, for everything false has already burned away, and only the eternal remains. In Baka, the seeker no longer says, I love God. They recognize that it is God who loves through them. They no longer say, I serve God. They see it as God serving himself through their hands. They no longer claim, I live. They breathe as witnesses that only the real lives through every breath. And so the purpose of Fana and Baka is profoundly human, yet divinely anchored. To awaken in such a way that the world itself is illumined through you. To live as a bridge between heaven and earth. To shine quietly, humbly, as proof that the veil has been lifted. Not for your own sake, but for the sake of all. This is the heart of the mystery. Fana strips away illusion. Baka restores you as truth. Fana empties you. Baka fills you. Fana takes. Baka gives. Together, they prepare the soul not to escape the world, but to walk within it, as light, as fragrance, as a living remembrance of the real. And so the purpose of Fana and Baka is not the end of the path. It is the beginning of true life, a life where the servant remains, but is mirror, vessel, fragrance, flame. A life in which everything you do becomes a silent proclamation. Only God is. Beloved listener, the path of Fana and Baka is not far from you. It is written in the breath you are taking now, in the silence between your thoughts. A longing that stirs when you hear words like truth, love, and home. To die before you die is not a distant secret. It is the hidden invitation of every heartbeat. And when you surrender, when the self dissolves, You will find that nothing has been lost. What remains is light. What abides is love. What continues is the real. Living through you, as you, in you. This is the journey of inner alchemy. The transmutation of illusion into truth, of fire into light, of dying into eternal life. If these words touch something within you, carry them, share them, so that others may remember what is already written in their hearts. Save them, so that you may return when forgetfulness closes in. And walk with us, for this circle of remembrance grows with every soul that joins. Subscribe to Inner Alchemy, where we unveil the hidden wisdom of the mystics, the philosophers, and the poets. Together we walk the path of remembrance, the path of transformation, the path of the eternal now. Until we meet again, may your heart be polished, your soul be light, and your being whisper with every breath, only God is.
Only God is. What y'all think about that? We got one more. Salam. Salam. Talking to the family. Back to online. To the online community. We're going to play another study. We're just enjoying ourselves, loving ourselves through self-respect. So if there's no questions, we're going to get ready and prepare the next study. Let's see if we can. I was trying to get it on the screen. Let's see if I can. If not, just play it.
Well, his ways are higher than ours, or we can't understand God's justice. That's not theology. That's damage control. Let's get this straight. If any modern leader, any president, general, or king said, "God told me to kill every child in that village," they'd be labeled a psychopath and locked up in an institution. But when God does it in the Bible, suddenly it's holy. That's a double standard. Don't act like it's not. And don't come in here saying, but that's the Old Testament. Like somehow the timeline justifies it. Because guess what? The same God doesn't retire. This isn't Yahweh version 1.0. There's no patch update in the New Testament that fixes the bugs. Jesus didn't come down to rebrand a different deity. He literally says, I and the Father are one. So whatever was happening in those genocides, still on the same divine payroll. You want to know what's insane? People will lose their minds over explicit scenes in TV shows. They'll cry about protecting the children and decency. But those same parents will hand their kids a Bible full of war, slaughter, betrayal, human sacrifice, and divine wrath. Because somehow it's spiritual. It's not. It's sanitized violence packaged in gold leaf. Let's talk Job. That whole setup is a cosmic bet. God lets Satan ruin a man's life just to prove a point. His family dies. He's covered in boils.
Imagine being able to build an app with your name on it, just by thinking about it. Meet Base 44, a complete AI creation platform.
He's humiliated. Also, God can win a round of spiritual poker. And the kicker? When Job demands an explanation, God doesn't give one. He just flexes. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Translation, shut up, I'm God. That's not love. That's power play. That's an authoritarian boss reminding the employee who's in charge. And people praise it like it's wisdom. You're not being enlightened. You're being gaslit. Now I know some of you are clenching your fists, scrolling to comment something like, blasphemy, or you're twisting scripture. No, I'm not. I'm reading it out loud. You just don't like how it sounds without the choir music in the background. The Bible doesn't need to be twisted to make it look brutal. It is brutal. You're just used to it being sugar-coated by preachers who need your tithe. You ever hear about the she-bears in 2 Kings 2? Elisha gets mocked by a group of kids, calls him Baldy. And what does he do? He curses them in the name of the Lord. 2 bears come out of the woods and rip 42 of them apart. That's not even a metaphor. That's the text. And people have the nerve to say God doesn't have an ego problem. That's not divine justice. That's divine overkill. You don't get to cherry-pick love, mercy, and peace and ignore wrath, jealousy, and destruction. Either you take the whole thing or admit it's full of contradictions. And don't pretend it's all old covenant. That's just theological duct tape to patch over the fact that the God in those pages doesn't always look like a savior. Sometimes he looks like a tyrant. But people can't handle that, so they build a fake God in their heads. One that only quotes Jeremiah 29 verse 11 and John 3 verse 16. They never read Lamentations. They skip over Deuteronomy 28 where God says, if you disobey me, I'll make you eat your children. You heard me. Go read it. But sure, God is love, right? So here's the real problem. People worship a character they've never met. They just trust whatever version was handed to them by someone on a pulpit. No questions asked. Meanwhile, the actual text is sitting there, full of rage, control, jealousy, punishment, and domination, and everyone's too scared to say the obvious. This doesn't look like divine love. This looks like divine obsession with loyalty, obedience, and fear. Now go ahead, scroll through the comments. Someone's already typing, you're misinterpreting it. No, I'm not. I'm just not dressing it up in church clothes. You're uncomfortable because I'm not filtering it through a feel-good devotional. Let's stop pretending the Bible was written by a bunch of monks sitting in a candlelit room taking divine dictation. That fantasy might sell in Sunday school, but in the real world? That's not how the book came together. You've got over 60 different books, written by different authors, in different political eras, with different agendas. And somewhere along the way, the most powerful people in the world decided which writings would get to represent the voice of God, and which ones would be buried, burned, banned, or edited into oblivion. Don't act surprised. You really think the Roman Empire was going to hand spiritual control of the world to a decentralized group of persecuted believers? No. They hijacked it. And once Constantine made Christianity a state religion, you can kiss the idea of an untampered Bible goodbye. What followed was centuries of power brokers deciding what God can and cannot say, based on how well it kept the people obedient, fearful, and controlled. You want to know how real that is? Let's talk about the Council of Nicaea. Everyone loves to pretend it was just a theological debate about the divinity of Christ. That's PR nonsense. It was a political summit. Bishops were dragged in under pressure. Dissenters were threatened, silenced, or exiled. Books were selected, others were trashed. And once the canon was locked, every wrong gospel suddenly became heresy. Instant erasure. Instant damnation for anyone who questioned it. You don't call that censorship? Because it fits every definition of the word. And here's where it gets darker. The stuff that got in wasn't just preserved, it was rewritten. Go look at the dozens of manuscript variants. You think scribes just made spelling errors? No. Changes were intentional. Doctrinal verses were inserted. Words were shifted. Passages that elevated church hierarchy or reinforced fear of eternal punishment conveniently made their way into the text over time. There are over 5,000 Greek manuscripts of the New Testament, and not one of them is exactly the same. Let that sink in. Not one. Identical. Copy. So, which version is God's Word? The one with more fire and brimstone? The one that supports your denomination's theology? Or the one that got buried because it made people ask too many questions? And speaking of questions, let's get real about the book of Revelation. That thing barely made it into the canon. It was rejected by multiple church fathers, banned in some early churches, and treated with suspicion for centuries. You know why? Because it's chaos. It's apocalyptic fever dreams written during political persecution. But it's useful, terrifying, symbolic, and vague enough to scare people into obedience. That's why it stayed. Meanwhile, actual texts that encouraged spiritual growth, personal discovery, or questioned authority. Gone. The Gospel of Thomas? Cat. The Gospel of Mary? Banned. The Apocalypse of Peter? Too much detail about hell for the church to control the narrative, so it got the axe. The Gospel of Judas? Forget it. Paint Judas as someone who understood Jesus. Can't have that. These books weren't heresy because they were false. They were heresy because they threatened the system. The second you give people spiritual autonomy, real power to question, your grip on them weakens. So they buried it. Literally. That's why we're digging up papyrus scrolls in Egypt 2,000 years later, still finding banned books with radically different messages. Let's look at something simple. Take the word hell. It's not even in the original Hebrew or Greek the way you think it is. You've got Sheol, Gehenna, Tartarus, 3 different concepts, all lumped under the same term by English translators with an agenda. And every time eternal fire or unquenchable flames show up in English Bibles, go check the Greek. Half the time it's metaphor. But you wouldn't know that because no one taught you how to read it in context. They just told you to be afraid and keep tithing. Even the image of Satan evolves inside the Bible. That's right, he's not a consistent character. In some parts, he's an accuser, a prosecutor. In others, he's a tempter. Then, by the time we get to Revelation, he's a dragon. That's not theology. That's narrative drift. That's a character being reshaped by centuries of cultural fear and religious propaganda. But they tell you it's all consistent. That it's God-breathed. As if divine inspiration can't be corrupted by human ambition. As if empires, kings, bishops, popes, and warlords just step back and let God speak with no interference. Give me a break. You ever wonder why you're discouraged from reading anything outside the canon? Because once you do, the cracks start to show. You realize entire perspectives were edited out, perspectives that would have made you question everything you were told. You realize there were competing ideas about God, about Jesus, about good and evil. Ideas that didn't survive, not because they were wrong, but because they weren't useful to the people in charge. Let's stop playing this childish game where people pretend the God of the Old Testament and Jesus of the New Testament are exactly the same in personality, behavior, and motive. They're not. Not even close. Anyone who tells you they are either hasn't read the Bible or they're too afraid to say what's obvious. You don't need a theology degree to spot the difference, you just need a functioning brain and a pair of eyes. The God in the Old Testament is territorial, tribal, quick to anger, obsessed with rituals, and constantly threatening people with destruction. He demands animal sacrifice, dietary restrictions, and genocidal warfare. You disobey? You're dead. You touch the wrong ark? Dead. You light incense the wrong way? Dead. You lie about land ownership? Dead. This is the same God who sends plagues, floods, fire from heaven, and angelic hit squads for minor infractions. Now compare that to Jesus. He eats with tax collectors, touches lepers, defends a prostitute, flips tables, not to kill people, but to protest corruption. He says turn the other cheek, love your enemies, forgive endlessly. It's not even the same energy. One is a divine warlord, the other sounds like a street-level revolutionary philosopher with a death wish and a compassion complex. People try to stretch their theology to make it fit. Well, you see, it's just different covenants. No. Stop. That's spin. That's PR. You don't get to just change the entire tone and call it progressive revelation. If a character in a book goes from nuking cities to washing feet with no transition, you call that a retcon. And that's exactly what's happening here. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Jesus directly challenges the religious authorities who claim to speak for God. You think that's just about Pharisees being mean? No. It's about a broken system that weaponized God's name to control people. Jesus calls them snakes, hypocrites, whitewashed tombs. He even tells them that their father is the devil, not Abraham, not Moses, the devil. He accuses them of using scripture as a bludgeon instead of a mirror. That's not theological disagreement. That's open rebellion. Look at the Sermon on the Mount. You have heard it said, but I say to you. That's not commentary. That's contradiction. He's rewriting the playbook in real time. He says, Moses told you this, but I'm telling you something else. You don't talk like that unless you're dismantling something. And you don't dismantle something unless you think it's broken. And by the way, when he flips out in the temple, it's not because they were breaking Jewish law. It's because they turned a sacred space into a bank. He doesn't ask Rome to fix it. He doesn't file a complaint with the Sanhedrin. He makes a whip and starts flipping tables. That's not the behavior of someone trying to polish the system. That's the behavior of someone trying to burn it down. Let's talk crucifixion. People say Jesus died for our sins. But whose system demanded that death? Who required blood to forgive? Not Jesus.
Not him.
That demand came from somewhere else.
Not him.
He even says, Father, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing. That doesn't sound like someone who believes this execution is part of some holy ritual. That sounds like someone who sees a corrupt machine grinding up another human life and trying to show people a way out of it. And don't forget the temptation scene. Satan offers him political power. Says all the kingdoms of the world can be his if he just bows. That's not just a personal test. That's a metaphorical middle finger to the entire concept of empire-based religion. Jesus doesn't want the throne. He doesn't want the temple. He doesn't want the approval of the elite. He wants none of it. And that's exactly why they kill him. Then there's the Gospel of Thomas, yeah, that book your church doesn't talk about. In that text, Jesus isn't performing miracles or threatening judgment. He's teaching people that the kingdom of God is within them. No priests, no temples, no rituals. Just knowledge. Direct access. No middlemen. You think that message fits with the God who needs altars soaked in animal blood? Of course not. That message got buried because it made the whole religious economy obsolete. And here's the punchline, people will still tell you it's all consistent. That Jesus and Yahweh are just two sides of the same coin. Sure. Just like a surgeon and a serial killer are both instruments of justice. You can't slap the same label on completely different behavior and expect people not to notice. Look at the fruits. One says, stone adulterers. The other says, let he who is without sin cast the first stone. One says, wipe out the nations and take their land. The other says, blessed are the peacemakers. One says, eye for eye. The other says, forgive 70 times 7. That's not nuance. That's a total shift in morality, in leadership style, in worldview. But say that out loud and watch how fast people panic. They'll quote a few verses, yell context, and then shut down. Because deep down they know that if Jesus is the full image of God, then a whole chunk of the Bible doesn't match. And if it doesn't match, they'd have to ask real questions. And nobody in power wants you asking those. Let's get one thing clear right now. This so-called spiritual war that churches keep whispering about in vague metaphors, it's not a mystery, and it's not subtle. It's a full-blown, system-level strategy that's been running from Genesis to Revelation. And the real kicker? Most people have no clue they're caught in the crossfire. Not because the Bible hides it, but because religion buries it under layers of Sunday school nonsense and cartoon theology. Start with the basics. The character Satan doesn't just show up to play the villain in a couple of chapters. He's woven into the system, quiet, calculated, deliberate. In Job, he's operating under divine permission. In the Gospels, he's bold enough to approach Jesus directly. In Revelation, he's running global influence at scale. This isn't some sideshow character. This is infrastructure. Let's talk tactics. You've got two major ones: temptation and accusation. And no, I'm not talking about vague moral slip-ups or feeling bad. I'm talking about engineered psychological warfare. The first move is always the setup, lowering the standard, rewriting the rules, normalizing the abnormal. It starts with subtle distortions. Take Genesis 3. The serpent doesn't tell Eve to hate God. He just reframes the command. Did God really say? That's manipulation 101. Create doubt, implant curiosity, weaponize ambiguity. Then comes the second phase, accusation. Once the fall happens, once you break, once you fail, that same force that pushed you off the ledge turns around and becomes your prosecutor. It's a trap cycle. He's not just the tempter. He's the executioner. That's why in Revelation, he's called the accuser of the brethren. Day and night, hammering you with shame, regret, worthlessness, disqualification. Sound familiar? That's not random guilt. That's a system designed to crush you after you've already been compromised. Now zoom out. Look at how that plays out on a macro scale. In Matthew 4, Satan offers Jesus all the kingdoms of the world. Let that sit. He says, all this has been given to me, and I can give it to whomever I want. Jesus doesn't call him a liar. He doesn't correct the claim. He rejects the offer, but not the premise. So that's where your political empires come from? That's where global power flows? That's your real supply chain? It's not just about evil individuals. It's about systems built on allegiance. Corrupted reward structures. Economies of power that only flow to those who bow. And don't tell me that's just ancient history. That pattern is still alive. Look around. The world's most celebrated icons, billionaires, influencers, they're playing the same game. They sell their soul, bend their values, and suddenly the door opens. Media, money, control, legacy, all handed to them. And the second they resist or expose it, gone. Cancelled. Destroyed. That's not coincidence. That's enforcement. Now let's go back to Jesus. Because when he cast out demons, it wasn't for show. These weren't magic tricks. These were hostile takeovers of human minds and bodies. And the demons knew exactly who he was. No introductions needed. Have you come to torment us before the time? They already knew their deadline. That means this war has a clock. And the clock is ticking. And by the way, the demons didn't show up in obscure corners. They were inside synagogues. Religious spaces. That should tell you everything. The battlefield is not out there. It's inside the structures that claim to be holy. That's why Jesus calls the religious elite children of their father, the devil. Not metaphorically. Not symbolically. He looks the temple establishment in the face and tells them they're running Satan's agenda under the banner of righteousness. That's not a gentle rebuke. That's a direct accusation from the mouth of someone who saw the game from the top down. Let's go deeper. Ephesians 6 says our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, rulers of darkness, and spiritual wickedness in high places. That's not poetry. That's a hierarchy. That's an org chart of supernatural authority influencing governments, institutions, and ideologies. Paul doesn't say, watch out for sin. He says you're in a war against an invisible bureaucracy designed to enslave your mind, control your choices, and keep you numb. And don't sleep on the most effective weapon in that system, religion. Not atheism. Not Satanism. Religion. Safe, domesticated, guilt-drenched religion. Because nothing kills your spirit faster than believing you're being holy while you're actually reinforcing your own chains. Keep the rituals. Say the right words. Follow the motions. But never wake up. Never ask real questions. Never confront the contradiction. That's how they win. You ever wonder why Jesus never wrote anything down? Because he wasn't building a library. He was detonating a system. He wasn't handing out doctrine. He was calling people out of a rigged game. And they killed him for it. Not because he broke laws, but because he exposed who was really running things. That's the playbook. This isn't a fairy tale. This isn't a cartoon devil with a pitchfork. This is control, surveillance, shame, guilt, manipulation, false authority, spiritual trauma, all dressed up as tradition, legacy, and God's will. And most people eat it up because it feels familiar, it feels safe. But it's not. It's a cage. A psychological prison built by a system that knows exactly how far it can push before you snap, and then blames you. Let's talk about censorship. Real censorship. The kind that doesn't burn books in the streets, but buries them in deserts, locks them in underground archives, or bans them with an official stamp from a religious council that says, this isn't inspired. And the worst part? Most people have no clue that the Bible they're holding is the edited version. The trimmed down, church-approved, empire-endorsed edition. You think you've got the full story? You don't. You've got the version that survived because it made the right people comfortable. Let's go back to the 2nd and 3rd centuries. Early Christianity wasn't unified. It was a battlefield of ideas. Dozens of gospels. Dozens of letters. Hundreds of manuscripts. There wasn't a single agreed-upon canon. You had movements like the Gnostic, the Ebionites, the Marcionites, all with radically different interpretations of Jesus, God, the devil, the soul, and salvation. Some said Jesus was divine. Others said he was purely human. Some said the material world was evil. Others said it was good. It was theological chaos. Then power stepped in. The Roman Empire saw a fractured, persecuted religion and figured out how to weaponize it. Constantine legalized Christianity, but it was a personal spiritual awakening. It was about unifying the empire. And you can't unify an empire with 20 different theological narratives flying around. So the councils began. Nicaea, Hippo, Carthage. The bishops didn't just sit around reading scripture and praying for clarity. They voted. They debated. They exiled dissenters. They burned books. You ever heard of the Gospel of Thomas? It was discovered in 1945 in Nag Hammadi, Egypt. You know why it wasn't in your Bible? Because it doesn't promote church hierarchy. It doesn't say believe and obey. It says seek and find. It has Jesus telling his followers that the kingdom isn't coming in the sky, it's within you. No fire. No judgment. No hell. Just inner transformation. And that message? Too dangerous. You can't control people with that. How about the Gospel of Mary Magdalene? Not only does it give Mary more authority than Peter, it suggests that Jesus taught secret wisdom not everyone was ready to hear. And guess who rejected it? The men in power. The same men who built their authority on Peter's so-called supremacy. You don't need a conspiracy theory. You just need history. If a text elevated a woman, taught hidden knowledge, or undermined priestly control, it got axed. Then there's the Gospel of Judas. Everyone's favorite villain suddenly becomes the one disciple who actually understood Jesus. According to that manuscript, Judas didn't betray Jesus out of greed, he did it because Jesus told him to. Because the crucifixion was part of a cosmic plan to escape the physical prison of this world. That's not just controversial. That nukes the entire narrative of Judas as the ultimate traitor. Can't have that. So into the forbidden pile it went. Let's be clear, these texts weren't excluded because they were provably false. They were excluded because they didn't match the agenda. Because they didn't serve the centralized power structure the early church was trying to build. They offered freedom instead of fear. Mystery instead of dogma. And when you're trying to control a growing religious empire, the last thing you want is people thinking for themselves. You ever notice how the books that made the final cut all seem to support obedience, hierarchy, punishment, and submission? That's not a coincidence. That's strategic editing. And don't forget, most people couldn't even read the Bible for over 1,000 years. It was chained to church walls, written in Latin, and only accessible to clergy. You think that was an accident? No. That was deliberate. Keep the masses ignorant. Keep the interpretation locked behind robes and rituals. Even the translations were controlled. When William Tyndale translated the Bible into English, they executed him. You heard me, executed. Burned at the stake. Why? Because he believed people should read the scriptures in their own language. Because he dared to make it accessible. That's the level of control we're talking about. And here's the part that should really make you pay attention. Some of these banned texts were buried on purpose. Sealed in clay jars, hidden in caves, because the people who preserved them knew they'd be destroyed. That's how we found the Nag Hammadi library. That's how we found the Dead Sea Scrolls. These weren't just random scribbles. They were deliberately preserved records of alternative spiritual history. And they completely blow up the official version. Let me make this simple. The Bible is not one book. It's a collection. A curated, politically sanitized collection that was shaped by centuries of councils, emperors, popes, and theologians with agendas. There are other texts, legit, ancient, powerful texts, that were locked out, silenced, and erased because they didn't fit the narrative that control demanded. And if you've never heard this in church, don't be shocked. That system was built on obedience, not disclosure. You're not supposed to know about the hidden gospels. You're not supposed to question why certain books made the cut and others didn't. You're supposed to stay in line, recite the approved verses, and never crack open anything that says God might not be who they told you he is. So now you know. And I want to say this from the bottom of my heart, to everyone still watching this video right now, thank you. Thank you for having the guts to look past the surface, to ask the real questions, and to keep listening even when it got uncomfortable. You're the reason I do this. Keep digging. Keep thinking. Keep watching.
So was that new knowledge or was that old knowledge? Now we should understand. Or if anyone don't understand, here's your time. Next study, we're going to study the monad. The monad is the next understanding that they took away from the people, and this is what they lodged into the Quran. Which is the truth of God? Don't forget the question of the poll, A, B, or C.
Obedience punishes disobedience and rules through fear. That is not the ultimate God. That's a counterfeit. A cheap copy. A ruler of this material prison who thinks he's at the top, but he's not. They call him many names. In some texts, it's Yaldabaoth. Others call him Samul, the blind god. Not blind physically, blind spiritually. This being doesn't know the monad, the true source of all. He thinks he's alone, thinks he created everything. His own arrogance is his signature. I am God and there is no other besides me. That phrase? It's not a declaration of power. It's a red flag. That's the mark of someone pretending to be absolute while overcompensating for his ignorance. This entity isn't creating out of love. He's manufacturing control. He didn't create the world as a gift, he created it as a trap. The systems you're born into, the flesh, the laws, the suffering, the cycles of guilt, sin, shame, all of it is part of the architecture of control. And the shocking part? Billions of people unknowingly worship him. They think he's the ultimate God. But he's a builder, an imitator, a warden, not the source. Let's talk about the playbook. How does he control? First, he hijacks the narrative. He positions himself as the creator, the lawgiver, the punisher. His name is stitched into every institution. Schools, courts, Religions. He sets up rules designed to break your spirit, then blames you when you collapse. He tells you you're broken, then demands your worship. That's not divinity, that's domination. Next, he enforces duality. Right and wrong, pure and impure, chosen and damned. This isn't to elevate your soul, it's to fracture your identity. Keep you swinging between guilt and pride, fear and obedience, always looking up for salvation and never inward. Because the moment you look inside and recognize the divine spark within, his illusion starts to fall apart. You ever wonder why ancient texts that challenge this narrative were hunted down, burned, banned, or declared heresy? Not because they were primitive or irrelevant, but because they exposed the fraud. They spoke of a God above the creator of this world. A monad. A true source that didn't create through force but through emanation, like light radiating from a flame. That source never descended into matter. That source never needed temples, sacrifices, or obedience. That source doesn't demand. It is. Let's be clear, the fake God wants worship because he feeds on control. He's insecure, jealous, paranoid. Why else would he ban knowledge? Why else would he tell you not to eat from the tree of knowledge? Because he knows, the second you wake up, he loses you. That's why awakening is framed as sin. Why rebellion is framed as evil. Why curiosity is punished. Because truth breaks his system. You were born into a world rigged to keep you asleep. Not just politically or economically, but cosmically. The entire structure is designed to keep you from realizing who you are and who's really pulling the strings. And don't fall for the trick of blaming human evil alone. This is deeper. This is metaphysical control masked as divine order. And listen, don't mistake order for truth. Just because a system is old, powerful, and widely accepted doesn't mean it's right. The idea that the violent, wrathful God of the Old Testament is the supreme being? That's the con. He's not the source. He's a middle manager who seized power and made himself king. You know how kings keep power, right? They build armies. In this case, it's archons, spiritual enforcers that regulate thought, emotion, and even perception. They lock the soul into cycles of reincarnation, trauma, and confusion. Ever feel like you're waking up but the system pulls you back in? That's not your imagination. That's design. People are waking up, though. And when you start asking questions, really uncomfortable ones, about the nature of the God you were told to fear and obey, the entire house of cards starts shaking. That's when you realize the real betrayal wasn't just what they told you, it's what they didn't tell you. They didn't tell you there was a higher God. A God beyond names. Beyond punishment. Beyond books. That God, the monad, doesn't need your fear. Doesn't punish questions. Doesn't create prisons and call them kingdoms. That God doesn't play favorites, doesn't write books that justify genocide, doesn't demand your humiliation to prove devotion. So why is the fake God still in charge? Because the system runs on ignorance. On tradition. On inherited obedience. On fear of hell and craving for heaven. But when you really dig into the origin stories, not the cleaned up ones, but the banned, buried, apocryphal ones, a different picture emerges. One where the God at the center of worship is not the God at the center of truth. And that should make you angry. Because your soul has been played. You've been handed a mask and told it's the face of God. But behind that mask is the architect of bondage. You've been taught that God is someone you can picture. A king on a throne. A man with a beard. A voice in a cloud. Let me crush that fantasy right now. The real God isn't someone you can imagine, describe, or fit into a sermon. The monad isn't a person, isn't a gender, isn't even a being in the way you understand it. You can't reduce the monad to a character in a book or a voice in your head. And that's exactly why mainstream religion doesn't talk about it. Because the monad can't be weaponized, can't be branded, and can't be monetized. You want to talk about God? Fine. Let's talk about source, unconditioned, uncreated, indivisible source. The monad doesn't act. The monad emanates. Not out of command. Not out of will. But out of pure ontological necessity. Everything that exists flows from the monad like light from a sun. Yet, the monad is untouched by any of it. It is the only reality that's truly autonomous. Everything else is just noise in comparison, including your precious creator gods. Here's the part people can't handle. The monad doesn't care about your religion. Doesn't demand worship. Doesn't have chosen people. Doesn't need a book to prove it exists. If you're expecting some big man in the sky keeping score of your sins, you're still trapped in the kindergarten version of metaphysics. Grow up. The monad is beyond thought, beyond duality, beyond the entire framework your mind operates in. You ever notice how every institutional version of God mirrors human insecurity? Jealousy, anger, vengeance, judgment. That's because those are projections, not revelations. That's humans playing dress up with divinity. You're not worshipping the monad when you sing in church. You're participating in psychological projection. The monad doesn't require devotion. It doesn't want your obedience. It's not some cosmic narcissus begging for praise. The monad simply is. It doesn't need your validation. And that's what makes it terrifying to people who want control. Because here's the deal, if the monad can't be defined, then nobody can claim to represent it. No priest. No prophet. No institution. And if nobody can claim to represent it, then the entire religious industrial complex collapses. That's the threat. That's the danger. That's why the monad was erased from public theology and buried under a mountain of fire and brimstone propaganda. Not because it's false, but because it's unprofitable. The monad is so far removed from matter that it doesn't interact with this world directly. It doesn't micromanage. It doesn't intervene. You won't find it in burning bushes or carved commandments. That's low-level theater compared to the monad. Those events are the work of intermediate powers, emanations of emanations, distant shadows pretending to be the source. The monad never steps into the mud of materiality. It's not interested in cosmic soap operas. And that's exactly why most people reject it. Because they don't want a God that's pure and silent and unknowable. They want a God that makes them feel special. A God that tells them they're right and everyone else is wrong. A God that dishes out rewards and punishments like a divine vending machine. The monad doesn't do that. The monad doesn't play favorites. The monad doesn't play at all. You think that makes it distant? Cold? No. That makes it real. Because any God that's obsessed with being noticed, praised, and obeyed sounds more like a dictator than a deity. The monad doesn't need to scream to be supreme. It doesn't need to punish to prove power. It just exists. And everything else, all the chaos, noise, pain, and worship, is the result of beings operating far below it, pretending they're in charge. Don't ask the monad to fix your life. It's not your therapist. It's not your daddy in the sky. It's not here to solve your problems. It's the source of being, not the manager of your personal crises. You want someone to fix your karma, go pray to one of the iconic gods still selling salvation to the desperate. But don't confuse that with the monad. Because the monad doesn't offer deals. It doesn't make promises. Barter. And no, it's not cruel. It's not indifferent. That's just your ego talking. The monad is prior to concepts like good or evil. It's prior to duality. It's prior to your psychology. It's not playing your game, and that's why it's the only thing worth calling divine. Everything else? Theater. Simulation. Noise. You want to connect with the monad? Drop your theology. Burn your mental idols. Stop talking and start unlearning. The monad isn't something you believe in. It's something you return to, through silence, through disintegration, through annihilation of the fake self you were taught to perform. You want to know where this whole mess began? It didn't start with sin. It didn't start with the devil. It didn't even start with humans. It started with a rupture, a breakdown in the divine realm, and the name at the center of it is Sophia. That's not some poetic character. That's not wisdom in an abstract sense. Sophia is a being, a high eon, part of the divine order beyond space and time, and she broke the structure. She acted without her consort. She created without permission. And that act? That unilateral emanation? That's the original crack in the system. Sophia didn't create beauty. She created a mistake. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but the result was catastrophic. Her creation was malformed. It was arrogant. It was powerful and stupid and blind. It was Yaldabaoth, the so-called creative god that billions now worship. He wasn't created through balance. He wasn't authorized. He was an accident, an abortion of the divine order. And he didn't know it. Yaldabaoth didn't crawl into power through merit. He inherited it through error. And like any insecure tyrant who doesn't know his place, he claimed the whole thing. He saw the void, the chaos, and instead of returning to source, he doubled down. He declared himself supreme. I am God and there is no other. That wasn't theology. That was delusion. That was the ego of a being so disconnected from the monad that it mistook silence for absence. And here's the kicker, Sophia didn't just sit back and let it unfold. She was horrified. She watched as her unformed child started constructing a false cosmos, a layered prison of matter and illusion. She watched him craft archons, false powers, rulers of worlds, beings made to enforce his control. And she couldn't stop it. She was exiled, pushed to the margins of the divine order for her mistake. She became a fallen eon. Not because she was evil, but because she broke the symmetry of the divine pattern. So now we've got a psychotic demigod ruling over a fake cosmos, and the one being who might fix it is locked out. That's your origin story. Not Eden. Not Adam and Eve biting an apple. This. Right here. A cosmic error, a broken system, and a self-declared God at the top who doesn't even know he's a glitch. And don't romanticize Sophia. This isn't some soft-spoken goddess in a flowing robe whispering to the stars. Sophia is raw existential weight. She bears the guilt of creating a monster and the pain of watching sentient beings suffer under his rule. You think hell is a fire pit underground? No. Hell is being awake in a world ruled by her mistake. You ever wonder why everything in this world is laced with suffering? Why everything beautiful decays? Why the system feels rigged from the start? That's not human corruption. That's the structure. That's the blueprint laid down by a being born of imbalance. Yaldabaoth didn't create with love. He created with confusion and fear. He mimicked divine order like a child copying letters he doesn't understand. And now we're all living inside his imitation of reality. Let's be clear, this isn't mythology. This is metaphysical architecture. The world you inhabit isn't neutral. It's engineered. And not by someone wise or benevolent, but by a tyrant who believes he's God because no one told him otherwise. He's like a child locked in a control room, pressing buttons, thinking he's in charge of the whole universe. And billions worship him. They pray to him. They kill for him. They call him holy. That's not religion. That's Stockholm Syndrome on a cosmic scale. Meanwhile, Sophia's still out there. Not ruling. Not punishing. Mourning. Watching. Whispering into the cracks. Her spark is in you, buried under the trash code of Yaldabaoth's creation. That's why you know something's wrong even when everything looks normal. That's why you feel sick watching injustice repeat. That's why the world feels plastic. Because deep in your structure, there's a conflict. The blueprint of the monad is clashing with the system of the tyrant. Sophia's fall wasn't a myth. It was a warning. It showed that even in the highest realms, imbalance can spawn chaos. And now we live in the aftermath. In a cosmos that looks like order but smells like rot. And you're told to be grateful for it. You're told this is the best possible world. That suffering is part of the plan. That obedience is salvation. That's the propaganda of the Archons. That's the narrative of a broken child god afraid to be exposed. So no, this world didn't come from perfection. It came from collapse. From rupture. From the disobedience of a divine being trying to create independently. Sophia didn't fall because she was evil. She fell because she reached too far. And the result is the system you're trapped in, a system built by her mistake, ruled by her malformed offspring, and enforced by beings who think control equals divinity. Still want to sing praises to the God of this world? Go ahead. But don't say you weren't told the truth. Don't say no one ever showed you the cracks. Because once you see them, you can't unsee them. And once you recognize whose hands built this cage, you'll understand why it's so damn hard to get out. You want to understand how this whole thing stays intact. It's not just some rogue creator god running around building sandcastles. This thing is structured, engineered, enforced. You're living in a closed system with layers of surveillance baked into the architecture. The term? Archons. Not angels.
That means
not demons.
days.
Think cosmic middle managers with a superiority complex and a job description that reads, keep them asleep. These are not mythical fairy tale creatures, these are metaphysical gatekeepers. Bureaucrats of illusion. Enforcers of the Grand Con. They don't show up with pitchforks or wings. They operate through influence, mental, emotional, energetic. They distort perception. They hijack memory. They engineer your sense of reality from the moment you're born. You think free will is real? Go ahead and try to break out of the mental cage they installed around you since you were a toddler. Try stepping outside the manufactured narrative and see how fast the system snaps your hand. This isn't about simulation. It's about control. The Archons care whether you're good or bad, they care whether you're compliant. Whether you stay in your lane. They reinforce the illusion that you have choices, while every path is pre-approved to loop you back into their maze. Career, religion, family, entertainment, all sanitized, pre-packaged, designed to keep your head down and your soul disconnected. The Archons feed off submission. Not worship. Not devotion. Submission. They engineer polarity, a fear versus desire, guilt versus pride, to keep your psyche bouncing between extremes, never balanced, never silent. You're always reacting. That's how they feed. And no, not metaphorically. Energetically. Your confusion, your distress, your spiritual exhaustion, that's dinner. And they don't work alone.
Talking about the inner.
They build a hierarchy. Cosmic trickle-down oppression. At the top, you've got the demiurge, the unhinged architect who thinks he's God. Below him, the Archons. And below them? Us. The cattle. But even among humans, there's stratification. Ever notice how some people seem to thrive in this broken world, almost like they were made for it? The Archonic system promotes the ones who serve it best. The ones who sell illusion efficiently, who embody the program and infect others with it. Celebrities, preachers, CEOs, political puppets, most of them are drones. And some? Worse. Fully aware collaborators. You're told this world is neutral. That it's just nature, chance, evolution. Nonsense. The precision with which misery is distributed, the systemic repetition of trauma, that's not randomness. That's orchestration. You're not in a school. You're in a lab. And the Archons are the researchers taking notes while you struggle to figure out why nothing makes sense. They've got layers. You die? Cool. They're waiting. They've rigged the afterlife too. Ever heard of the light tunnel? The one you're supposed to walk into when your body dies? That's not heaven. That's intake. That's where they wipe your memory and send you back in. Recycled like trash. Reincarnation isn't spiritual growth, it's asset management. You're a battery. And they make sure you never run out of belief systems to keep you plugged in. Still think you're awake? Try breaking the script. Try speaking out loud that the God of this world isn't real. That the hierarchy is synthetic. That the system is parasitic. See how fast people call you insane. See how fast friends and family recoil. That's the programming. The Archons don't need to police you. They've trained everyone around you to do it for them. Self-regulating soul cages. Genius. They've infected everything. Language, symbols, emotions, even the concept of goodness. They've turned obedience into a virtue and sovereignty into sin. Every time you choose conformity over truth, they win. Every time you swallow the official story because it's easier than being alone in what you know, they win. And you? You lose another piece of yourself. You think the apocalypse is coming? No. The apocalypse already happened. It was the moment you were born into a rigged system and told it was home. This isn't a waiting room for heaven. This is the battleground. Not for your body, for your awareness. And the Archons aren't some mythological side note. They are the system. The mechanism. The firewall that keeps you from accessing anything real. They're not here to punish you. They're here to use you. To keep you investing in illusions. To keep you distracted while they harvest your consciousness like data. And they're really good at it. Because their number one tactic? Convincing you they don't exist. That everything is just human nature, just politics, just society. They hide behind normal. Behind routine. Behind the illusion of choice. Let's stop pretending this is just about metaphysics or philosophy. This is war. And not the kind with guns or politics. This is a psychological occupation. A spiritual lockdown. You're not living under free will, you're living under spiritual martial law, enforced by an invisible regime that weaponizes everything, your fears, your hopes, your culture, your belief systems. You were trained to accept slavery and call it order. That's not a bug, that's the architecture. This isn't about good versus evil. That's a decoy. The real battle is between consciousness and programming. And every time someone gets close to exposing the programming, the system reacts. Hard. Look at history. Mystics, rebels, whistleblowers, heretics, people who saw through the machine always ended up silenced. Burned. Exiled. Ridiculed. You're not allowed to question the fundamental structure. The moment you do, the hive mind turns on you. Not because you're wrong, but because you're dangerous. The spell only works if everyone agrees it's not a spell. Most people are not awake. They're functional sleepwalkers. And before you pat yourself on the back, even you are probably still wired into it. The education system? Indoctrination. The media? Narrative control. Religion? Behavioral management. Even your relationships are rigged with emotional landmines to keep you dependent, insecure, reactive. You're being steered, constantly. Not by accident, by design. Because a soul that questions is a soul that remembers. And they can't afford that. You ever wonder why personal growth is always packaged in neatly branded, socially approved spirituality? Crystals, yoga, overpriced retreats, 10-step healing guides, all manufactured relief valves for the soul. They're not trying to wake you up. They're selling you better dreams. Keep the body relaxed, the mind busy, and the spirit sedated. The system loves that. Controlled awakening.
That's what they call the
Safe
Trinity.
rebellion. It's pathetic. And don't even start with the positivity cult. You've been gaslit into thinking that anger, grief, rage, those are bad. That you have to smile through systemic rot. That you're toxic if you call out bullshit. No. Those emotions aren't dysfunction. They're signals. Warnings that you're being spiritually assaulted. But the system doesn't want you listening to those signals. It wants you chanting affirmations while they bleed your essence dry. Even the most rebellious people, the anarchists, the activists, the conspiracy junkies, most of them are still plugged in. You don't escape the system by hating it.
Spiritual junkie.
You escape by dismantling the parts of it inside you. And that's the hardest part. Because the cage isn't just external. It's psychological. The archonic program lives in your trauma, in your habits, in your language. It's been downloaded into you since birth. You were coded like software. This is why real liberation is rare. Because it's not glamorous. It's not romantic. It's ugly. It's violent. It's the disintegration of everything you thought was real. And no one around you will clap when you do it. In fact, they'll turn on you. Because your awakening threatens their sedation. Misery loves company, but illusion requires it. And yeah, they've built safety nets everywhere. Controlled opposition. Simulated awakenings. Every angle of escape has been preloaded with distractions. You want to fight the system? They'll sell you a revolution. You want truth? They'll bury you in data. You want meaning? They'll hand you a religion. You want rebellion? They'll dress it up in celebrity and feed it back to you through a podcast and a product line. It's all gamified, all commodified, all neutralized. Even your own self-image has been corrupted. The system teaches you to build your identity from trauma, status, consumption. You think you are your thoughts? Your job? Your politics? Your pain? That's not you. That's the mask the system needs you to wear so you never find what's under it. You've been trained to perform yourself instead of being yourself. You're a character in your own life, following a script written by forces you don't even see. This isn't hyperbole. This isn't just how the world works. This is structural spiritual sabotage. From birth to death, you're nudged, guided, redirected. And every single system around you is calibrated to reward conformity and punish deviation. Not because it's moral, but because it's efficient. You are a product in a closed-loop feedback system. And your suffering is not collateral damage, it's fuel. You think your struggles are personal? They're systemic. Your depression? Your isolation? Your chronic doubt? All engineered consequences of spiritual dislocation. You've been severed from source and plugged into a feedback loop of illusions. And the more you try to be happy, the more the system laughs, because it knows the only way out is to burn the damn thing down. Inside you. You want to know how this ends? Let's talk about the real exit. The jailbreak. Not a fantasy. Not some fluffy new age promise. I'm talking about the real, raw process of breaking through the layers of this system and touching the origin, the monad. And make no mistake, this isn't enlightenment with incense and soft music. This is demolition. Total collapse of the false self, the false world, and everything you were programmed to believe was truth. We're going back to ancient texts that were suppressed for a reason. The Gnostics didn't just talk about the structure, they gave the blueprint for escaping it. This is where the mainstream versions of religion short-circuit. They teach obedience, submission, worship. Gnosticism teaches awakening, confrontation, knowledge. The word is gnosis, not faith, not belief. Gnosis, direct knowing. And that kind of knowing is dangerous. Because once you know, you can't be controlled. You don't bow to the system. You burn through it. Now pay attention, this isn't symbolic. The Gnostics taught that this material world, this entire construct, was a multi-layered prison. Each level guarded by archons, parasitic intelligences who operate as gatekeepers. Think of them as psychic customs agents. And when you die, they don't roll out a red carpet. They interrogate your soul. They pull every trick they can to send you back into the loop. Reincarnation is not a gift. It's a leash. But the ancient Gnostic texts like Pistis Sophia, the hypostasis of the archons, and the Apocalypse of James don't just describe the trap, they describe the code to break it. When a soul ascends, it must face these rulers, not with fear, but with knowledge. The soul has to name them, recognize their nature, reject their authority. That's the key. Recognition. They thrive in your ignorance. They lose power the second you strip their mask. The knowledge required isn't memorized. It's not in rituals. It's internal. It's remembering that you were never born to this system. You were injected into it. A spark from the monad, hidden inside a body, a mind, a false identity. The game was to keep you asleep. The escape is to remember. Not in theory, in experience. And don't confuse this with astral travel or channeling or visions. Those are still within the system. The astral plane? Just another layer. The archons operate there too. They don't care whether you think you're spiritual as long as you stay inside. Real breakthrough doesn't happen in dreams or altered states. It happens in awareness, unfiltered, sober, direct confrontation with your own programming. You have to break every mental attachment. Family, nation, religion, social identity, all of it. Not because they're bad, but because they're tools of the trap. The more invested you are in the drama of the world, the less chance you have of seeing the exit. And the system knows this. That's why it floods you with distractions, causes, wars, outrage. As long as you're emotionally entangled, you're not going anywhere. In the ancient accounts, the awakened ones didn't die like the rest. They ascended. They passed through the heavens, confronting each archonic power by name, declaring their origin, claiming their right to return. This wasn't symbolic storytelling. This was an actual description of the soul's journey post-mortem. And it terrified the early church. That's why these texts were hunted, burned, buried. Because they didn't just undermine doctrine, they blew up the entire control system. Why do you think the church was so obsessed with obedience and sin? Because the moment people realized they weren't born broken, they were born hijacked, the whole salvation industry collapses. You don't need saving from your nature. You need liberation from the system that labeled your divine spark as sinful in the first place. The monad never judged you, never punished you, never trapped you. That was the work of the imposter gods, the construct Sophia's mistake unleashed into the layers of reality. And they've been playing God ever since. But even they can't stop a soul that's fully awake. That's the one thing they fear, recognition. Because when you recognize the trap, you start seeing through it. You stop feeding it. And eventually, you break it. The Gnostics didn't die for poetry. They were exterminated because they carried a key. And even now, that key still exists. It's not found in churches or temples. It's not in books or chants. It's in you. Buried under the noise, the trauma, the programming. You don't find it by seeking. You find it by unlearning. Stripping away the layers of who you're not, until all that's left is signal, and everything else is interference. The journey to the monad isn't about belief. It's not about being good. It's about being real. Pure signal. Pure awareness. No illusions, no identity games, no cosmic authority figures. Just you and the source, and the memory that you were never separate to begin with. Thanks for staying with me through this entire deep dive. No filter. No sugarcoating. Just raw data, direct. If you're still here, it means something inside you is shaking. Let it. That's where the real work begins. And I'll see you in the next one.
How was that study? The monad, the study of the monad. Put your comment. Please come in. We have another understanding, but if y'all don't want to participate, I'll do it by myself. So let me know. If not, I gotta go. Let's see. We have our meeting tomorrow, public meeting, tomorrow at 11. Tomorrow at 11. How to escape, how to break through all the understandings of what we studied here tonight. We're going to let that settle in, and we're going to come prepared, and we're going to be able to work to understand how to break through this psychophysical, metaphysical metaverse. As we was given some clues from the study, these clues are already known. We're going to go expose them tomorrow. And for the understanding of all those who love themselves, please respect yourself first. I don't see nothing in the comment box, so I'm going to go finish studying by myself, and I'll see y'all tomorrow at 11. Peace and love. As-salam. As-salam.